When a black man boards a first-class flight, a racist passenger demands he be removed, insisting he doesn't belong. The cabin falls silent until he calmly reaches into his jacket and flashes an FBI badge. What happens next shocks the passengers, humbles the bigot, and sparks an unforgettable in-air reckoning. Elijah Brooks was used to flying. In fact, he'd practically made the skies his second home over the last decade. As a special agent with the FBI, his job demanded constant movement briefings in Boston, interrogations in Atlanta, sting operations in Vegas, but this flight felt different. Flight 228 from Dallas to Washington, D.C., a 3-hour nonstop, was meant to be routine. A quiet return to headquarters after a week-long undercover operation that had exposed a corrupt alliance between 2 major city officials and a defense contractor. He should have been exhausted, maybe even relieved. Instead, as he approached Gate 37 at Dallas-Fort Worth International Airport, he felt the familiar twinge in his gut, the kind that came with being a black man in a high-profile position, walking through spaces that weren't built with people like him in mind. He didn't need to announce who he was. He carried himself with a quiet confidence that turned heads without trying. The tailored charcoal gray suit he wore hugged his broad shoulders perfectly. His shoes gleamed like mirrors, and the leather satchel over his shoulder looked more like it belonged to a high-powered attorney than a government agent. The gate agent glanced at his boarding pass and smiled. "First class, Mr. Brooks." "Yes, ma'am," he said with the polite nod he always gave when he was being watched, to which, truth be told, was almost always. "Enjoy your flight." With a quiet thank you, Elijah walked through the jet bridge, feeling the curious gazes even before he stepped onto the plane. He'd been through this dance before, the subtle stares, the shifting eyes, the slight hesitations. It didn't matter how he was dressed or how polite he was. Some people always saw his skin before they saw his credentials. He entered the aircraft and took in the plush, first-class cabin. The seats were wide and leather-bound, the overhead bin spacious, and the faint scent of citrus from a recent cleaning hung in the air. He found his seat when Aeon casually opened the bin to stow his satchel. "Excuse me," came a sharp voice behind him. "Excuse me." He turned slightly to find a woman standing just behind him. She looked to be in her mid-50s, white, with frosted blonde hair that was styled to perfection. Her pearl necklace gleamed under the cabin lights, and her pink Chanel blazer hugged her frame with practiced elegance. Her eyes, however, were anything but warm. "Yes?" Elijah asked calmly. She wasn't looking at him, she was looking past him, toward the nearest flight attendant. "Is there someone available?" she asked the crew member, in a strained set tone. "I think there's been a mistake." Carlos, the flight attendant, approached with a practiced smile. "Yes, ma'am. How can I help you?" She pointed, not even hiding her gesture. "This man, he's in my row. This is first class." Carlos's smile wavered. "Yes, ma'am, that is correct. He's seated in 1A. She blinked. "I think you should check again. First class is very expensive." "Are you sure?" Elijah raised an eyebrow, still silent. He'd seen this play out before. It always started the same. A subtle implication, an innocent mistake, and then, if unchecked, a full-blown display of prejudice disguised as concern. Carlos glanced at Elijah, then back at the woman. "I scanned his boarding pass personally. He's exactly where he should be," the woman huffed. "I just think someone should double-check. It's not every day someone like that," she faltered, realizing what she'd said. "I mean, someone dressed like that is sitting in 1A. Elijah finally spoke, his tone calm and razor-sharp. "Like what, exactly?" She blinked, caught in the act. "I didn't mean anything by it. I didn't expect to see a black man in first class," he asked flatly. Several passengers looked up from their phones. The silence that followed felt like pressure dropping in a cabin mid-flight. "I think you're being overly sensitive." The woman sniffed. "I just asked a question." "No, ma'am," Elijah replied, reaching into his inner coat pocket. "You made an assumption, one that's about to backfire." With a single motion, he pulled out a black leather wallet and flipped it open, revealing his golden badge and federal credentials. Carlos leaned slightly forward, eyes widening. "FBI? Special Agent Elijah Brooks," he said. "And yes, I paid for this seat with my government travel card. But even if I hadn't, the assumption you made is still your problem, not mine." The woman's face went pale. Her lips parted as if to speak, but no words came out. The surrounding passengers stared, some in quiet admiration, others in discomfort. Carlos quickly stepped in. "Agent Brooks, can I offer you a drink?" "On the house." "Appreciate the offer," Elijah said, closing his badge and tucking it away. "But I'm good." The woman sank into her seat, eyes fixed on the seat back ahead of her. The pearl necklace now seemed to strangle her posture more than accessorize it. No one said anything further. The captain's voice crackled over the intercom, welcoming passengers and advising them to prepare for takeoff. As the engines roared to life and the plane began taxiing down the runway, Elijah leaned back in his seat and exhaled slowly. Another day, another flight, another stranger who underestimated him the moment he stepped through the door. But this time was different. This wasn't just another microaggression brushed under the rug. It was public, exposed, and while the woman may have thought she was embarrassing him, She had unknowingly put herself on display for an entire cabin of witnesses. As the wheels left the ground, Elijah opened his laptop. There was still work to do, files to review, reports to finalize. He was due in D.C. at 10:15 a.m. for a meeting with the assistant director. The corruption probe he'd just concluded had implications for military contracts and federal funding. Billions were at stake, reputations, lives. But even as he scrolled through files, part of his mind lingered on the woman in 1B. He'd seen her type too many times to count. The ones who saw his skin first, and everything else second if at all. The ones who were polite until challenged, who used coded language instead of slurs and thought that made them better. She was quiet now, but he could feel her unease radiating. Maybe she was embarrassed. Maybe she was stewing. Either way, Elijah had learned long ago that staying composed didn't mean staying silent. He wasn't here to educate her. That wasn't his job. His job was to uphold the law, protect the Constitution, and root out corruption wherever it hid. Still, part of him hoped that maybe, just maybe, something about this moment would stick with her. Maybe next time, she'd think twice before assuming who someone was based on what they looked like. Half an hour into the flight, Carlos returned, offering Elijah a warm towel, and again asking if he'd like a beverage. This time he accepted a sparkling water. As he sipped, he looked out the window at the cottony clouds passing beneath them. The irony wasn't lost on him. He was headed to D.C., the seat of American democracy, carrying the evidence that could bring down a powerful senator's re-election campaign, and yet, here he was, fighting for basic respect at 30,000 feet. Respect he'd earned. Respect he shouldn't have to demand. But Elijah Brooks didn't play for applause. He played for results, and when he landed, there would be plenty more work to do. The cabin lights dimmed as the plane settled into cruising altitude. Elijah Brooks leaned back in his seat, still feeling the residual sting of the encounter at boarding. The woman beside him, whose name he had no interest in learning, with stiff posture, her lips pursed in a line that tried to communicate dignity, though it bled insecurity from every edge. Occasionally, she'd glance sideways at him, quickly turning away the moment their eyes almost met. Elijah didn't care to engage further. He'd made his point. The badge had spoken. But if there was one thing experience taught him, it was that some people didn't learn until they crashed into the wall, of consequence sometimes twice. He returned his attention to his laptop. Inside was the culmination of 6 months of federal surveillance, wiretaps, whistleblower interviews, and thousands of hours of field work. Elijah had been investigating a multi-million-dollar bribery scheme involving a defense contractor, tactical, and 2 members of Congress. One of them, Senator Jack Aldridge, had publicly claimed to champion military accountability, but behind closed doors, he had been steering lucrative contracts in exchange for kickbacks and political favors. Elijah had infiltrated a fundraiser as a high-net-worth donor, quietly capturing illegal conversations. The report he was now compiling would go straight to the Justice Department. But just as Elijah typed a critical note on the chain of evidence, he noticed movement beside him. The woman, her pearls still gleaming but now visibly rattling, leaned into the aisle and waved over Carlos, flight attendant. Again. "Excuse me," she whispered, her voice heavy with false concern. "I think we may have a situation." Carlos looked confused. "Ma'am." She lowered her voice, trying to sound like a confidant. "The man next to me, the agent? He's been typing nonstop, very serious, and I saw something about detonators and military contracts. I'm not saying he's dangerous, but should someone like that really be working on those things around civilians?" Carlos blinked in disbelief. "You think he's a threat?" "He showed me his FBI credentials." She leaned in closer. "But did you verify them? Anyone could flash a badge these days. Maybe it's fake. Maybe this is some kind of cover." Carlos frowned, clearly uncomfortable. "Ma'am, I assure you he boarded first class under his own ticket. TSA verified his ID. But we don't know what he's really working on, do we?" She pushed, eyes scanning the aisle conspiratorially. "He's been acting very secretive, making calls in hushed tones before we took off. Who knows what's in that bag?" Carlos was about to respond when Elijah calmly turned his head toward them. "Everything all right here?" The woman jumped slightly. "Oh, I didn't mean to bother anyone. I was just concerned about, well, Homeland Security and all that." Elijah closed his laptop slowly, his eyes locked on hers. "I work for Homeland Security, and you're dangerously close to filing a false report about a federal agent. That's a felony, by the way." Carlos straightened up, tension tightening. His shoulders. "Sir, I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to interrupt your work." "It's not your fault," Elijah said. "Some people just like to dig deeper holes when they should stop talking." The woman flushed again, clearly sensing that her second attempt had failed, but this time, she wasn't just embarrassed. She was angry. Something in her pride couldn't handle the idea that a black man had not only claimed his space beside her but had silenced her twice without even raising his voice. She sat upright again, glaring now not with fear, but with the bitter poison of resentment. Elijah reopened his laptop. He wasn't surprised. This wasn't about her thinking. He was a threat. It wasn't about the government files or national security. It was about control. About someone like her, wealthy, white, and used to being right, being unable to accept someone like him in a space she thought she owned. An hour passed in relative silence. Flight attendants moved quietly down the aisle, offering drinks and light snacks. Most of the cabin had returned to their movies or books, but the tension at the front hadn't gone unnoticed. One row behind, a young woman in her 20s who'd been silently observing leaned forward. "Agent Brooks," she said gently. Elijah turned. "Yes. I just wanted to say thank you for how you handled that. People like her, they think they're subtle, but everyone saw what she did. You stayed calm, and you made your point without yelling. That was powerful." He offered her a small nod. "Thank you. I'm a law student," she continued. "Second year at Howard. Watching you reminded me why I chose this path." That touched something in him, a flicker of pride. "What's your name?" he asked. "Kayla." "Kayla Jefferson." "Kayla, I hope you stick with it. We need more voices like yours in law." The woman beside him scoffed audibly. "You'd think we were in some kind of diversity recruitment seminar," she muttered under her breath. Kayla's eyes narrowed. "Excuse me?" "Nothing," the woman replied dismissively, turning her head away. "Just tired of being told I'm the problem because I noticed something unusual. Sorry for being a concerned citizen." "No, you're not sorry," Kayla said. "You're embarrassed, because your little performance got shut down in front of a plane full of witnesses. If Agent Brooks were white, you'd be asleep by now with a glass of wine and a podcast." The woman's mouth dropped open, clearly not expecting to be challenged by someone half her age. "Elijah," Kayla said, turning back to him, "I don't know what your case is about, but if you're going to D.C., I hope you shake some trees up there. We've got a whole forest of people just like her, pretending they're the victims." He chuckled softly. "Oh, I plan to." But just as the conversation calmed, turbulence hit. The plane shuddered violently for a moment, causing a few gasps. Across the cabin, a jolt of panic broke the fragile silence. Overhead bins rattled, the seatbelt sign dinged on dot, and suddenly, the woman erupted. "I knew it," she shouted, pointing at Elijah. "He's the reason. He's doing something. Check his bag. I saw him looking out the window like he was waiting for something." The entire first-class cabin turned. Carlos rushed back. "Ma'am, please calm down. This is standard turbulence." "No," she barked. "He has government files. I saw restricted access on his screen. He might be leaking something. Or hacking." Elijah stood up slowly, not in defense, but with the calm authority of a man who had nothing to prove and everything to enforce. "Sit down," he said quietly. The woman backed into her seat, but kept gesturing to the passengers around her. "Are you just going to let him intimidate me? I'm a taxpayer. I have a right to feel safe." From the back of the cabin, another voice rang out toward her, deeper, confident. "Lady, the only person making us feel unsafe is you." Heads turned, as a tall black man in a tailored navy blue suit stepped forward. He looked to be in his 50s, wore glasses with thick black frames, and had the air of someone who owned boardrooms and courtrooms alike. "I was trying to mind my business," he said. "But I've been listening to you since boarding, and I've had enough." That man is a federal agent doing his job. You, on the other hand, are playing a dangerous game. The woman flinched. "And who are you?" He smiled tightly. "A federal judge, Judge Leonard Mallory, appointed by the president. And if you don't sit down and shut your mouth, I'll personally see to it that a report is filed with Homeland Security for harassment of a federal officer in transit. That carries a prison sentence, by the way. And unlike him," he gestured to Elijah, "I'm not as patient." The woman's face turned beet red. She sank so low into her seat she might have disappeared. The cabin applauded. It wasn't loud, but it was honest. Passengers nodded, clapped lightly, and murmured their agreement. Elijah looked at Judge Mallory. "Thank you. No thanks needed. But when we land, remind me to buy you a drink. We should talk." Carlos returned to Elijah with another water and a grateful look. "Sorry, again, Agent Brooks. I've worked a lot of flights. I've never seen anyone keep it that together under pressure." "I've dealt with worse," Elijah replied. As the turbulence subsided, calm returned to the cabin. The woman said nothing more for the rest of the flight. Kayla returned to her book. Judge Mallory returned to his seat. And Elijah, once again, turned back to his laptop. But now there was a small shift in the Iran awareness. A reckoning. The racist assumptions, once whispered or dismissed, had been publicly challenged, not just by Elijah, but by an entire community of witnesses who chose not to look away. And that, he thought, was worth more than any badge, because dignity, when defended in silence, dies quietly. But when defended out loud, it changes the room. The seatbelt sign chimed off as the plane made its final descent into Washington, D.C., and a soft thud signaled wheels touching down on the runway. Flight 228 taxied toward the terminal under a brilliant morning sun that painted the clouds in gold and lit up the Capitol skyline through the windows. For most passengers, this was the end of a long, uneventful flight. For Elijah Brooks, it marked the beginning of what could be the most pivotal day of his career, and for the woman in 1B, It was the moment her carefully constructed image began to crumble under the weight of the truth she tried to suppress. Elijah shut his laptop and stretched, his back slightly as the plane pulled up to the gate. He could feel the eyes on him, again not the suspicious kind this time, but the curious, uncertain kind. Many had witnessed what happened between him and the woman during the flight. Some were clearly reflecting on it. Others avoided his gaze, unsure if their silence had been complicity or self-preservation, but he didn't seek their approval. His mission was bigger than any moment of social tension. As passengers stood and gathered their belongings, the woman in 1B remained seated, clutching her designer handbag like a shield. Her lips were pressed into a tight, silent line. She had said nothing since being reprimanded by both Elijah and Judge Mallory. Now it was clear she was trying to vanish, to become invisible among the rows of travelers filing past. Elijah stood, slowly, retrieving his satchel from the overhead bin. As he turned to leave, she whispered, barely audible above the rustle of bags and jackets, "I didn't mean for it to go that far." He paused, not turning around. "You meant exactly what you said? You just didn't like what happened when people heard it." She flinched. "I was scared." "No," he said firmly. "You were entitled. You thought first class belonged to you, and people like you. You tried to weaponize your fear to humiliate someone who didn't fit your expectations. That's not fear. That's arrogance wrapped in privilege." Then, he walked away. The aisle cleared quickly as passengers deplaned. Outside the gate, reporters buzzed like bees around gate B7. Elijah spotted them from the jet bridge and sighed somewhat. Must have tipped off the media about the investigation he was returning from. He adjusted his tie and took a deep breath. The moment he stepped into that terminal, he would no longer just be the man in 1A. He would be Special Agent Elijah Brooks, lead investigator in a federal corruption case with explosive consequences for the defense sector and political elite. Kayla Jefferson, the law student from the flight, caught up to him just before he exited the gate. "Hey," she called. "I know you're busy, but I just wanted to say thank you again." He smiled warmly. "You said that on the plane?" "I know," she said, "but it's different now. Seeing you walk through all that with your head high, it was bigger than you realize. It made me feel like maybe the law can still work for people like us, that there's still space to fight." "There is," Elijah replied, "but only if people like you keep pushing through it. Don't let voices like hers shrink your ambition." "I won't," she promised. "And if you ever need a fiery young lawyer on your team?" He grinned. "I'll keep your name on file." As she walked off, Elijah turned toward the growing crowd of journalists beyond the security checkpoint. Just beyond them stood two men in dark suits, Deputy Director McAllister and Assistant U.S. Attorney David Cho, both waiting for him with urgent faces and briefcases in hand. They didn't waste time on greetings. "You've caused quite the media storm," McAllister said, falling in step beside him. "Didn't realize flying commercial would make headlines." Elijah quipped. "Not the flight," Cho replied. "The audio you uploaded during the dissent of Senator Aldrich talking about diverting military funds for private contracts, it leaked. Someone inside DOJ, it's already trending on social media." "I sent it encrypted," Elijah said, alarmed. "Doesn't matter. It's out now. Aldrich's office is denying everything, but the audio's crystal clear." They reached the escalator down to baggage claim, where more cameras waited. "We're fast-tracking the indictments," McAllister continued. "DOJ wants you at the press conference. They're announcing the arrests this afternoon." "I'll be there," Elijah said. "But first, I need to swing by headquarters and update my files." "There's one more thing," Cho added. "We vetted that woman from your flight, Elaine Preston. She's the wife of Richard Preston, CEO of Preston Aerodynamics, a subcontractor on one of the Orion tactical deals under investigation." Elijah's eyes narrowed. "You're saying this wasn't just racism? It might have been intentional?" "We're not ruling anything out," Cho said. "Maybe she didn't recognize you at first, but she sure tried hard to discredit you. Her husband has reason to stop this investigation." That changed everything. Elijah's mind raced. The false accusations, the feigned fear, the dramatic plea during turbulence. It wasn't just about skin color, it was about leverage, manipulation, perhaps even sabotage. If Elaine Preston had recognized him and tried to discredit him, she may have been attempting to compromise the chain of custody for the data on his laptop. If he had been removed, if his files had been seized or tampered with, the entire case might have fallen apart. "She's going to regret that seat assignment," Elijah muttered. Later that afternoon, the press conference began on the steps of the Department of Justice. Elijah stood behind the podium, flanked by Assistant Director McAllister, Attorney Cho, and a row of federal agents and attorneys. The seal of the United States Department of Justice gleamed behind them. Dozens of cameras flashed, microphones clustered at the podium like flowers reaching for sunlight. Elijah stepped forward. "Good afternoon. I'm Special Agent Elijah Brooks with the Federal Bureau of Investigation. Over the past 6 months, my team has worked tirelessly to uncover a conspiracy involving senior government officials, defense contractors, and illicit campaign donations. This afternoon, arrest warrants were executed against Senator Jack Aldrich, Congressman Donald Fairchild, and 4 executives of Orion Tactical Systems for crimes including bribery, money laundering, and procurement fraud. The evidence collected includes surveillance, audio, financial records, and personal communications, all corroborated under federal protocol. Gasps and murmurs swept through the press corps, but Elijah continued, his voice unwavering. The integrity of our democracy demands accountability from those who hold power. No position, no office, no privilege places anyone above the law. As reporters clamored for questions, Elijah noticed a familiar face at the edge of the crowded lane. Preston. She stood in the back, her jaw clenched, sunglasses hiding most of her expression, but she saw him, and he saw her. Not just as the woman who tried to have him removed from his seat, but now as someone possibly tied to a criminal enterprise. Shaken by the collapse of the walls she once assumed were impenetrable, he didn't nod. He didn't acknowledge her. He simply turned back to the cameras. When the conference ended, and as the press swarmed the departing officials, a group of young black students from a local law program approached Elijah near the steps. "Agent Brooks," one of them said breathless, "that was incredible. You made it clear that no one can define us by our appearance." Another said, "You just redefined what it means to lead," said a third. Elijah looked at them, their faces glowing with admiration, with hope. He saw his younger self in their eyes, hungry for justice, desperate to believe the system could still work. "You're the future," he told them. "So make sure you're louder, stronger, and braver than the generation before you." They smiled, nodded, and departed. As dusk fell over Washington, Elijah stood alone on the steps for a moment. The weight of the day began to settle in his bones. He had not just carried a case across the country, he had carried history, pain, and pride with him. And for once, the badge hadn't had to shout. It had simply been enough to show the truth, and that truth, he knew now, was too powerful to ever be seated in silence again.